Okay, let's dive in. Try and picture this for a second. It's the summer of 1919. The Great War, this absolutely brutal conflict, has finally ended.
Yeah, the fighting stopped,
Yeah.
but the world is completely transformed.
Right. Empires have crumbled, millions are gone, and now the winners, the Allied leaders, they're all gathering in Paris.
To try and figure out what peace actually looks like, it's a huge task.
And the result of all that effort was the Treaty of Versailles, probably one of the most, well, important and definitely controversial treaties ever signed.
Oh, absolutely. And understanding it is so crucial. If you're, studying this period, maybe for your IGCSEs or something similar, it really is fundamental.
Totally. And we've got some great source material here that you've shared, which should really help us and you get to grips with it. We've got breakdowns of the main terms, a really useful map showing the territory changes, even this amazing firsthand account from someone who was watching the signing happen, like live via telegraph.
It's fascinating stuff. So our mission today really is to use these sources to unpack the treaty, look at the key terms, understand the atmosphere it was created in and its immediate effects.
Okay, so let's start with that atmosphere. Paris, 1919. Your sources paint a picture of it being much more than just formal meetings, right? It sounds pretty wild.
It really does. It wasn't just a quick chat. The conference went on for 5 months, and Paris was just buzzing, packed.
Thousands of people.
Thousands. All descending on the city, pushing their own agendas, lobbying like mad to get what they want into the treaty. One of your sources describes it like a huge goodie bag, which I think captures it perfectly. Everyone's scrambling.
And not just the big European powers either. Your material mentions all sorts of groups were there trying to get noticed.
Definitely. Your sources specifically mention Arab and Zionist delegations, both pushing hard over Palestine, a really thorny issue that eventually led to Britain getting the mandate.
And Queen Mary of Romania turning up.
Yeah. Apparently, she was quite the operator. Managed to get Transylvania for Romania, even though Wilson apparently thought she was a dreadful woman.
Huh. Those little details really make it vivid. But it wasn't all success stories, was it? The source mentions Ukrainians trying to get independence.
That's right. A delegation of about 20 Ukrainians. They were pushing for an independent Ukraine, but they didn't succeed. Just shows you how many different hopes and, frankly, competing claims were swirling around Paris then.
Just an immense pressure cooker.
Exactly. And right at the center, you had the big three trying to thrash things out.
Georges Clemenceau for France, Woodrow Wilson for the U.S., and David Lloyd George for Britain. And your sources say they weren't exactly best friends.
Far from it. They argued constantly, especially Clemenceau and Wilson. They had really different visions for what should happen, particularly with Germany. Your sources say they quarreled to the point where the conference was in danger of failing altogether.
Wow, so it nearly collapsed.
It sounds like it came close.
Yeah.
And that's where Lloyd George apparently stepped up. Your sources really credit him with saving the talks.
How did he do that?
Well, he put forward his own proposals in March, the Fontainebleau Memorandum, and then he basically acted as the mediator. He got Clemenceau, who really wanted to punish Germany and ensure French security, to agree to Wilson's big idea, the League of Nations.
Okay.
And then he got Wilson, who was maybe more idealistic with his 14 points, to accept that Germany had to pay reparations, something France desperately needed.
So, a lot of compromise, a lot of negotiation. But while all this intense discussion was happening between the big three, where were the Germans?
That's one of the most striking things in your sources.
Yeah.
There was a small German delegation there, yes, but they were kept completely separate.
Separate.
Yeah. Your source says they were watching but not allowed to take part. Can you imagine? Your country's entire future is being decided,
Yeah.
and you're basically locked out of the room.
That sounds incredibly humiliating.
And frustrating, surely. They only actually got to see the draft treaty on May 7th, 1919.
And their reaction.
Your source uses the word outraged, capital O. They issued a formal protest, packed their bags, and went back to Germany.
Looked like they might just refuse to sign.
For a bid, yeah. But in the end, as your material states, Germany had no choice but to accept whatever was decided. The Allied blockade was still hurting them. The threat of invasion was real.
So they were basically forced into it.
Pretty much. They even struggled to find two politicians back home willing to actually go and sign the thing.
And speaking of the signing itself, that first-hand account you mentioned is incredible. Breckinridge Long, the U.S. diplomat.
Yes. It's such a unique perspective. He wasn't actually at Versailles in the Hall of Mirrors on June 28th.
No, he was thousands of miles away in Washington, D.C.
Exactly. watching it all unfold in real time via a telegraph link.
His description is amazing. He talks about being in the telegraph room, 10:30 a.m. Washington time, with a colleague. They had this direct wire, hardly any relays.
Just London, and then the cable under the Atlantic. You can almost feel the buzz in that room.
He says, as each signed, it was signaled out over the wire and ticked off on the receiver at our side. The operator's reading it by ear, typing it out.
And Long and his colleague are literally leaning over his shoulder and read the bulletins as they arrive. Wow.
What a moment. He calls it a unique and most interesting experience and a great occasion. It really hammers home the significance, doesn't it? Even across an ocean.
It absolutely does. It makes you realize this wasn't just some dry legal document. It was the climax of years of war and months of intense argument felt globally.
Okay, so, treaty signed. Let's get into the nitty-gritty. What did it actually say? Your sources give us that helpful acronym, BRAT.
Yeah, BRAT is a really good way your material offers to remember the main punishments forced on Germany. The treaty itself was huge, 440-odd articles.
The first chunk set up the League of Nations, Wilson's project.
Right, the first 26 articles.
Yeah.
But the rest, the vast majority, were about Germany's punishment and reshaping Europe.
So BRATB stands for blame.
Exactly. Clause 231, the famous or infamous War Guilt Clause, your source quotes it, the Allied governments affirm, and Germany accepts, the responsibility of Germany and her allies for causing all the loss and damage.
And the sources make it clear why this was so crucial for the Allies, don't they?
Yes, they stress it was vital. It wasn't just about pointing fingers. By making Germany accept legal responsibility for all the damage, it gave the Allies the justification they needed to demand. Well, the R in BRAT.
Reparations, the money.
A huge amount. 6,600 million.
Yeah.
And, crucially, as your source points out, Germany was not consulted on that figure at all.
Just told to pay up.
Pretty much. And the final amount wasn't even agreed until 1921. Your material puts it in perspective. If the payment plan hadn't been changed later, in 1929, Germany would have still been paying it off in 1984.
1984. That's staggering. It shows the sheer weight of that debt. Okay, next step, A for Army. Or armed forces, I guess.
Yeah, this part was about crippling Germany's military power. And the restrictions listed in your sources are incredibly severe.
Like what?
Army slashed to just 100,000 men. Tiny for a country Germany size. Conscription mandatory military service was totally banned.
So they couldn't build up reserves easily.
Exactly. And then no tanks, no heavy artillery, no submarines, and absolute no air force. The Navy was cut right back, only 6 battleships allowed.
And a big geographical limit, too, the Rhineland.
Yes, your sources highlight this. The Rhineland, the bit of Germany right next to France, had to be completely demilitarized.
Remaining.
No German troops, no forts, nothing military allowed in a 50-mile-wide strip along the French border. A buffer zone, essentially, to make France feel safer.
Right. Okay, finally, Tifo's territory. Germany lost a lot of land.
A huge amount, both in Europe and its colonies overseas. This is where that map in your materials really helps you visualize it.
So in Europe,
Alsace-Lorraine went back to France. Germany had taken that in 1871. Eupen and Malmedy went to Belgium. North Schleswig went to Denmark after a vote, a plebiscite. Danzig became a free city run by the League of Nations. And then there was the really controversial Polish corridor.
Controversial because?
Because it took chunks of West Prussia and Posen from Germany to give the newly created Poland access to the sea. But it also cut off East Prussia from the rest of Germany.
Ah, I see. Any other losses?
Upper Silesia, an industrial area, mostly went to Poland too. And Germany lost land in the east to the new Baltic states, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, though that land had originally been Russian.
So, adding it all up.
Your sources give the stats. Germany lost about 13% of its European land, 10% of its people, and around 13.5% of its economy. That's a massive hit.
And outside Europe? The colony.
All gone. Taken away and mostly given to Britain and France to look after as mandates. Your sources mentioned this was a sore point even before the war. Germany wanting its place in the sun, so losing them all was another big blow.
Were there any other restrictions like that? Things Germany wasn't allowed to do?
Yeah, a couple of key ones mentioned in your materials. Germany was initially banned from joining the League of Nations. Ironic, given it was Wilson's idea. They had to prove they were peace-loving first.
Yeah.
And they were strictly forbidden from uniting with Austria. The idea of Anschluss joining all German-speaking peoples together was blocked.
Okay, so that whole BRAT list, blame, reparations, army limits, territory losses, it's pretty harsh. Let's circle back to that German delegation hearing these terms in May 19. Your sources ask you to put yourself in their shoes.
It's a really useful exercise, I think. If you were German then, what would hit hardest?
Yeah,
Just the fact you had zero say in any of it, right? That would be infuriating.
definitely. Being dictated to. And then the terms themselves.
The War Guilt Clause, Clause 231, taking sole blame when many Germans felt the war had complex causes involving many countries. That felt deeply unfair.
And the reparations bill.
Mhm.
6,600 million, no discussion.
Seemed designed to crush them economically. Then the military being dismantled, a huge blow to national pride and security. And losing all that territory, especially the Polish corridor splitting the country.
You can absolutely see why the reaction was outrage.
Yeah, from that perspective, the term diktat, a dictated peace, which many Germans used, starts to make sense, doesn't it?
It does. So pulling this together, why is understanding all these specific terms so important for, say, an IGCSE student looking at this period?
Because, as your sources show really clearly, these terms fundamentally weakened Germany, territorially, militarily, economically. If you get asked, how did the treaty impact Germany? You can use BRAT, pull out these details from your sources, and build a really strong explanation, like that essay question mentioned in the material.
And it wasn't just the Germans who were unhappy, was it? Your sources say none of the big three got everything they wanted.
Exactly. Clemenceau probably felt it wasn't harsh enough on Germany, didn't guarantee French security forever. Wilson had to compromise on his ideals, like accepting reparations. Lloyd George worried it might be too harsh and cause future resentment. Everyone had to give ground.
Which ties into those focus questions in your material, doesn't it? Did the winners get what they wanted? Probably not entirely.
No. And that leads to the big debate your sources raise. Was Versailles a wasted golden opportunity for a lasting peace? Or was it actually the best possible outcome they could manage, given how shattered Europe was and how much disagreement there was?
There's no single easy answer there.
Not at all. The value of looking at these sources is seeing the terms, the context, the reactions. It gives you the tools to understand why people argue about whether it was too harsh or not harsh enough or just a messy compromise.
Right. So we've covered a lot. We've gone from that chaotic scene in Paris through the tough talks between the big three, had that amazing glimpse of the signing via telegraph.
And we've broken down those key terms using brat blame, reparations, army, territory, using the details right from your source materials.
Understanding all the specific demands, the context, the German anger, it's just essential for making sense of what happens next in the 20s and 30s.
Absolutely. The treaty didn't happen in a vacuum, and its consequences stretched for decades. It set the stage for so much conflict later on.
It really did. It shows how hard making peace can be after a war like that.
So maybe a final thought for you to chew on, based on what we've dug into from these sources. Considering the terms themselves, how they were decided, that immediate furious reaction from Germany was the Treaty of Versailles, basically doomed from the start. Was it inevitably going to cause more problems, or could things have turned out differently? What do you think, looking at this material, was the single biggest, most impactful consequence of these terms?